Canadian bankruptcies have surged to levels we haven't seen since the 2009 financial crisis. But before you accept that headline at face value, the story behind the numbers is more complicated and in some ways more alarming than the comparison suggests. Welcome to the Daily Brief Canadian Macro. I'm Steve. Today we're looking at Canada's rising insolvency crisis through the eyes of Ron Butler and Mark Mitchell, two analysts looking at the same data and reaching very different conclusions. We'll also hear from Marketmania on the explosion in power of sale listings across Ontario, and from Alex McFadden, who argues home ownership is more accessible than most Canadians think. That last one we're going to push back on. Let's get into it. Ron Butler covered why Canada's bankruptcy numbers have climbed back to 2009 levels, and his analysis points to a very specific cause. Not a broad economic collapse, but a concentrated crisis in BC and Ontario driven by pre-construction condo buyers. Here's the mechanism. Buyers who signed pre-construction contracts 6 years ago are now being asked to pay an additional $240,000 on top of their original 20% deposits due to construction cost overruns. That's a life-altering sum many simply don't have. When they can't pay, Butler says developers are seizing deposits, selling those units to vulture funds at steep discounts, then pursuing the original buyers through litigation for the full loss. Worth flagging, the $240,000 figure is Butler's characterization of the cases he's tracking, not a government-verified average, but the broader pattern, deposit seizure, distressed sales, and buyer litigation, is consistent with reporting out of BC and Ontario over the past year. Treat the numbers as illustrative. Butler also draws a parallel to 2009, when 5 major U.S. mortgage companies, including GMAC, abruptly exited Canada within weeks. He notes Canada's recovery then took only 14 months. The question he's implicitly raising, does this episode resolve as quickly, or do the dynamics drag it longer? If Butler is sounding the alarm, Mark Mitchell is asking you to check the methodology before you panic. And he has a point. Mitchell's argument is that while insolvencies have hit 2009 levels in raw numbers, adjusted for population growth, we're actually at 2019 levels, not financial crisis territory. Mitchell's process: extract monthly government data, convert to annual figures, calculate insolvencies as a percentage of population. It's the 1-hour math exercise, he notes, that CTV skipped entirely, even though the expert they interviewed told other outlets the adjustment was necessary. Legitimate criticism, but Mitchell's framing deserves pushback too. 2019 wasn't a healthy baseline. It was already a period of elevated household debt stress. Being back at 2019 rates is not the same as being fine. Mitchell himself acknowledges the trend is likely to worsen as unemployment continues to climb. The honest read isn't, don't worry, it's, we're not in 2009 yet, but we're headed somewhere. One analyst sees a crisis, the other says the headline overstates it. Both can be right. A concentrated severe stress in specific markets with a national picture that hasn't crossed into systemic territory yet. Marketmania painted a picture of Ontario's housing market under serious stress, and most of their evidence holds up, but a few specific figures deserve scrutiny. The core data is hard to argue with. Power of sale listings in Ontario are up 70% over last May and 292% from 2 years ago. April house prices are at their lowest in 6 years, with every month this year showing year-over-year declines, and 37,000 Canadians recently claimed bankruptcy or insolvency, consistent with what Butler described. On demographics, Marketmania says the average first-time buyer is now 40 years old. That's accurate for Ontario. TerraNet data puts the median Ontario first-time buyer at approximately 40, up from 36 years old a decade ago. A global analysis of 70 cities found Vancouver buyers entering the market at 46 on average, with Toronto and Montreal around 40 and 39 respectively. Nationally, CMHC's 2025 survey shows the largest share of first-time buyers are still in the 25 to 34 range, but in Ontario and BC, the 40 figure is real and well documented. Marketmania also claims seniors are now the biggest demographic taking out new mortgages. We looked for data to back that up and couldn't find it. What is documented, buyers over 35 counted for 39% of purchases in 2025, up from 30% in 2023. A meaningful shift, but not the same claim. That one reads as editorial interpretation rather than cited fact. On inheritance, Marketmania says 60% of Canadians rely on inheritance for retirement. The 60% figure exists, but it's being misapplied. A BMO survey found 60% of Canadians expect to receive an inheritance someday. That's very different from depending on one for retirement. The actual reliance figure is closer to 34% per a Vanguard survey. Still alarming, but there's a real difference between expecting and depending on an inheritance. Finally, the purchasing power claim. Market Mania says Canadians have lost 193.7% of their purchasing power on housing since 2005, and that $1 of home equity is worth only 34 cents. The underlying story is real. Home prices have roughly tripled since 2005, while wages haven't come close. But you cannot lose more than 100% of purchasing power. What they're actually describing is an affordability ratio collapse. A buyer today needs roughly 3 times the share of their income to buy the same home as someone in 2005. That's the correct and damning frame. The 193.7% figure just doesn't hold up mathematically as stated. Alex McFadden comes at us from another direction and argues homeownership is more accessible than most Canadians think. He provides an example of a $200,000 condo with 10% down, $20,000 up front, now worth $600,000, generating over $400,000 in equity. The math is correct. The problem is the baseline. Where is the $200,000 condo in 2026? The average condo is around $700,000. Vancouver's even worse. Even in secondary markets that used to offer real entry points, $200,000 doesn't get you very far. This framework made sense roughly a decade ago. In 2026, the entry point he's describing has largely disappeared. And just $20,000 up front, after inflation is eaten into real wages, with the jobs market visibly softening and a mortgage renewal wave still rolling through, $20,000 is not a casual number. For a medium income earner, that's a year or more of aggressive saving with nothing going wrong. McFadden's equity appreciation story is real, but it's a story about people who got in early, in the right market, and held. For someone approaching the market today, the entry price, carrying costs, renewal risk, and the demographic picture we've covered today all tell a very different story. The playbook that he's describing has a timestamp on it, and that timestamp is not 2026. Here's what today adds up to. Butler and Market Mania are pointing to real documented stress concentrated in BC and Ontario, driven by pre-construction collapses, rising power of sale listings, and a mortgage renewal wave that isn't finished yet. Mitchell is right that the national headline overstates it. Population adjusted, we're closer to 2019 than 2009, but 2019 wasn't healthy, and the trend is worsening. The demographic picture is where the long-term concern lives. A median first-time buyer age of 40 in Ontario, a generation increasingly factoring in inheritance into retirement plans, not as a strategy, but because the math doesn't work without it. The question for Canadian investors isn't whether real estate built wealth over the past 2 decades. It did. The question is whether the conditions exist today for the next generation to repeat that trade. Based on everything we heard today, the answer looks like no. Well, thanks for tuning in to the Daily Brief Canadian Macro. All credit goes to Ron Butler, Mark Mitchell, Market Mania, and Alex McFadden. Links to their videos are in the description below. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next brief, and don't be afraid to comment if there's another creator or topic you think deserves a highlight here. I'm Steve. As always, nothing here is financial advice. Everyone's situation is different, so please do your own research and talk to a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Good night.